Demerara sugar is kind of basically what we start out at. So you saw everything in the factory and how it was being made. Not some of the secret stuff, but with them making the only Demerara sugar in the United States, we figured it was a pretty good thing to be able to make rum out of it and not use any molasses. So this is how we get it, and this is the way it starts out in these 50-pound bags full of nice, pure, clean crystals, and we get about a pallet at a time. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna mix all that sugar up with a lot of water and put it in these fermentations. You'll see on here it's called a wash. If you were making whiskey, we turn that W upside down, it would be called a mash. But a wash means because we're washing the sugar cane when we initially mix it out. The biggest part of being a cook is having your recipe. So the yeast was one of the biggest things that we had to develop. Because if you think about it, the sugar is a local. It likes to be hot and humid. These tanks work on being up in the high 80s. When we get Key West winter and it's 70 degrees, it doesn't like it. It takes it longer to ferment. So we have a specific yeast that goes in there to get us our flavors. And as you can see, the yeast is working really hard right now, bubbling away, because what happens in this process is yeast actually eats the sugar, and that's how it produces alcohol. Having a bit of sugar to eat, it makes a little bit of alcohol, and then it burps. And making sure everything is right, that's when it's then going to be time to distill. At that point, we have about 6% alcohol inside of our wash. Now the tricky part is how are we going to get it out? So this is what it looks like when it's inside the wash and it's fermenting. And you can see the yeast starting to jump up and down inside of here. Yeast is alive, it's a living organism. It's a top fermenting yeast, which means everything with the yeast ferments from the top and works its way down and back up. This yeast right now, it has a smell of like cider and a little bit of pear that's starting to come off of it. So we're getting ready to have to distill this, but like I said, the magic trick is alcohol comes out of the still clear. So how are we going to get all this alcohol out of this big cidery pear mess? Well, that's where the stills come in, and that's where a little bit of science and a little bit of magic we can make it happen. This is called taking a gravity reading. You'll probably see people walking around the distillery doing this. We do this 1 to 2 times a day to see what all this yeast is doing and when it's ready to ferment. Once it's below 1010 on the scale, it'll be about ready. So this batch is just about ready to go. So this is our stripping still. So how a still works is we take the fermentation, which you have to remember, our name and our company is Chef Distilled. I've been cooking for 30 years. Everything in here is oriented kind of like when I had restaurants. Everything's on wheels, even the still. Probably the first time that Vendome, who makes all these stills in Louisville, Kentucky, they told me in 120 years has ever had to put wheels on a still. I told them it was just in case I needed to move it for a hurricane, but really being able to have everything in here mobile makes it a lot easier of a function. So we bring over the fermentation tank here and we pump it inside the still and we fill it up right up to the top of this cap. And now we have all that fermented sugar and yeast inside of it. And what happens is as we start to heat it up, the alcohol will heat a little bit sooner than the actual water and yeast. So steam begins to rise and comes up and builds up inside the helmet here and up in the column. You can think of it like a giant teapot. So all this steam, which the steam is the alcohol vapor, builds up and builds up and builds all this pressure up inside here until it's about to blow. And it literally is about to blow up. Then, through this pipe here and through this silver chamber, we add very cold water. Now here we have to recycle water, just like they did with Coca-Cola. To make it, we have to recycle our water because we don't want to waste it and have it going down the drain. So we chill it and we send very cold water through here, through this worm. We let it go through the cylinder and go up, and all of a sudden, once it meets that heat in the middle, the pressures change and it actually condenses. And what I mean by condensing is the vapor that's the alcohol hits the cold and starts to drip and makes its way down and comes down the copper tubing and comes down to here, where all of a sudden we start to get rum coming out of our parrot here. This is a spirit hydrometer. This is how we measure the alcohol. This is all done by proof, and we take a reading with the temperature, because it isn't always what it seems. It might be 120 proof, but after the temperature, it really might only be 117. We can also use percent. Alcohol is done in 2 different ways. These are very fragile, and they float inside of here, and the density of the alcohol shows us what the proof is. Once we can get all that stripped alcohol out, then we've just completed our stripping run. So let's take a look at one of our runs here. The stripping run produces, we get smells from this Demerara sugar. So we're getting a lot of the pear coming out. Also, the nose has a lot of butterscotch, like a sweet butterscotch. That is only really distinctual in the Demerara sugar. And there actually sometimes you'll be able to see there'll be a little fine layer of oil on the top of this. What that oil is out of the fermentation, naturally occurring things like aldehydes, esters that make flavor. That oil is what's going to make you have a hangover. They call it fusel oil, which in German means just bad oil. So between the fermentations and the stripping run, of us having a chemical reaction, we can have some impurities in here, which naturally occur. Now, sometimes this is where the process stops and it gets filtered. For us, we take it a little bit further because nobody likes a hangover, and all my life I've suffered, whether I have 1 drink or 10, I get the same thing, a really bad headache the next day. With the combination of all the minerals in the Demerara sugar, I can make a sweet, clean rum, but I have to go through one more step. And that's over at our spirit still here, so we're going to take a look at that.